Hi, everyone, and welcome back to Forethought, a podcast series dedicated to raising awareness about mental health and well-being through lived experience stories. My name is Joel. I'll be your host. And before we begin, I'd just like to acknowledge I'm recording today from the lands of the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation. I pay my respects to elders past, present, and emerging, and celebrate the diversity of Aboriginal peoples and their ongoing cultures and connections to the lands and waters of Australia. So today we're really lucky to be joined by Ruben from Other Side Edge Coaching Solutions. Ruben, thanks for joining us today. How are you going?
Thanks for having me, Joel, and thanks for the acknowledgement of country. Very important. Thank you.
So I guess today, really exciting topic we're going to be talking about. So it's all about psychological safety. It's a really topical, thing on the top of everyone's minds after the recent, hazard legislation from April. And so we're really excited to get your thoughts and opinions based on your experience in the sector. So I guess to start off with, how did you become a leadership life coach, and how did you get that really strong interest on the mental health and well-being space with, it ties into emotional intelligence and then ultimately psychological safety?
Well, I think you've just said everything I need to say today, so we could probably end the podcast now. So thanks so much for having me, Joel. Really appreciate having the opportunity to come and speak to you today about this strong area of interest. So I think for me, I'll go a little way back, not all the way back, but just give you a bit of an overview, I guess, of how I've come to be where I am in this industry. So as a child, high expectations, really critical home environment. I was a straight A student, state athlete, so excelled at whatever I did. There was a lot of pressure, became a pretty anxious high performer. So I imagine a lot of leaders I speak to experience the same thing, which is they're a high performer, but what often drives that is a high level of anxiety and even perfectionism. So a lot of pressure to have on such young shoulders. I left school at 17, I think it was 16 or 17. I did a course that my parents wanted me to do, which was design, industrial design. So not even working with people, working with products, which just bore me to tears. I started to find that I spent too much time in the bar at lunchtime.
Yeah.
And I think it was a bit of pressure release from that high pressure that I've been living with for so many years. I withdrew from that course with 6 months to go. I've come to peace with that now, even though I didn't look like it then.
How long was the course in total?
4 years full time.
Ooh.
Yeah, so, and I mean, I guess it was testament to the thing of if you're doing something you're not really passionate about, you can get it done, but do you have the discipline and the application, I guess, to continue it all the way to the end? And at that point in time, I was having too much fun and it was just an inconvenience. So left there. Yeah, alcohol took a whole new central forefront for me in my life, and I was working in a bar.
Dangerous.
Perfect environment, dangerous, yes, perfect and dangerous at the same time. I think it was around 25. I just had one of those, I guess, defining moments where I'd look back on my life, saw how much I'd achieved when I was younger, and how I was just flushing things down the toilet. And I knew that I was here for more than that. Started working in hospitality, and I was a barista, but also a counter hand at that time. And hats off to anyone doing that work. Bloody important, hard work, but really good opportunities for people to engage with people and listen to them. So people would come into the cafe, have a yarn with me at lunchtime. I'd have their coffee ready for them before they'd even come to the counter. So I knew what they needed. They needed to have a yarn. Their coffee was ready. But what I was actually demonstrating to people was that they were seen, they were valued, and I'd have a conversation with them about their day, a bit of a debrief in the cafe for them. So at that point, I realized how much I loved interacting with people and that I was good at it. And if I could leave people with a smile on their face, even just for a moment before they went back to their desk and their stress, my job was done. So customer service, true customer service. So at that point in time as well, I was diagnosed with depression and anxiety. So whether the alcohol use caused that or there was a predisposition there already, I think there might be. There's some history in the family. I won't go into too much disclosure there, but uh, it's given me a depth and a breadth of experience with the alcohol use, the anxiety and depression, to understand what it's like when you have poor mental health. Things seem really difficult, can seem pretty hopeless, and you can become pretty despondent as well. But like anything in life, my experience has generally been that when I have had a real struggle or a grapple with something or a battle with something, if I can get the support, or anyone can get the support that they need at that time, you can turn that challenge into a breadth of experience that can really support other people. So I started as a support worker, working in drug and alcohol, working with some clients who had some pretty complex issues, because by the time they get to that level of service, things aren't going too well. And, you know, a supporter of mine said, hey, you'd be really good at this. So that's when I got into the support work. Within 10 years, being an anxious high performer, I was the director of that organisation. So I moved through the ranks. Didn't feel quickly, but I guess 10 years from being a support worker to that level of being a non-executive director, I was running the place. So went from being a support worker to someone who was looking after, I think it was $15 million budget, 90 staff and 30 different programs. So yeah, my experience I can see has been stepping stones to get me where I am. I've been exposed to luckily, some really cool psychologically safe workplaces. And unfortunately, I've had the really crappy experience as well of working in a really toxic workplace. And I saw the impact that had on my own mental health and productivity, as well as that of my team. I'm happy to say that I was still able to provide the support to my direct team members, even within that environment. But it got me thinking. I thought I can make an impact in individual environment, workplace, and I can do that as a leader and I can do that well, or I can leverage up my impact. And that's when my calling, the angels sang, um, was to become a life and leadership coach, where I could exponentially help people and show them how to create psychologically safe workplaces. So that's a speed read of, if you want to call it that, of my experience, and what's got me interested is the mental health exposure, well-being, the importance of psychological safety, and wanting to impart that with as many organisations and people as I can.
Awesome. And yeah, thank you so much for publicly sharing your story about, you know, how you went through that period of anxiety and depression. I think, you know, that's a testament to yourself that you can talk about it openly. And I think, and we'll probably touch on later, is around the power that has on the people under you when you are open and do talk about that thing. I think we had a very similar path to where we got today, and we've got great haircuts to match. So hospitality.
Yeah.
So I think, yeah, you really get that customer experience when you're on the till. It's sort of, you know, 5 days. That's really, and you also treat people with respect, who, regardless of who they are, just sort of ingrained. So I guess, you know, that's sort of your why and how you got there. I guess let's touch on, because just recently, or just then, you mentioned seeing good and bad in different organizations, being in that sort of director level role. What can leaders do to influence a mentally healthy and psychologically safe workplace?
Well, yeah, thank you for that intro again, Joel. I think there's so much information out there about leadership, and there is so much information out there about psychological safety. And I still hear, and it boggles my mind, how psychological safety is often viewed as an afterthought, or something we'll do later, or something we'll do if we have time. The irony of that is, if we stop and we will first of all look at the legal responsibilities of psychosocial hazards that came in April this year. I think leaders are just now catching up with, generally, of course, some are way ahead, but generally can become so complex, people don't know where to start.
Yeah.
So I think identifying psychosocial hazards in the workplace, I think the first key foundational component of that is to understand what is psychological safety, what are the benefits of psychological safety, and all those things are good and well. But I like to work with people on the how. How do you create psychological safety? So there's some really basic things people can do as leaders. I think the first thing about leadership is people are watching us. People watch leaders like hawks, and they want to follow people who are authentic, who are transparent. But I think there's some really practical things that people can do to create psychological safety, and that is to provide clarity around what people's role requirements are. Brene Brown, I wasn't going to quote her, but here we go. Brene Brown says, "Clear is kind." And it's a really powerful, effective statement because I think if people are clear about their role requirements, what the goals, ambitions, and visions of the individuals are, the teams are, and the organisation is, it provides that transparency and clarity of what each person is required to do. I've also heard people say psychological safety allows people to get off the hook in terms of accountability. And I completely contest that. I think where there's role clarity, where there's clear vision, accountability is easier to enforce. It's easier for people to understand exactly what is required of them and deliver on that.
Mm.
The worst thing I think a leader can do is be a micromanager. And I see a lot of newer leaders who want to do an awesome job, think they have to control and be responsible for everything, find it hard to trust their teams and go, okay, now that you've got the clarity of the role and the requirements, I'm going to leave you to do what you're employed to do, which is to get the job done. So it takes trust for leaders to be able to step back and go, okay, I've given you the tools and the framework. Now I'm going to leave you to do the job. Other things that create psychological safety is constructive feedback in real time. No one really, I think the word conflict is often seen as a negative thing, but I think conflict done well is an important ingredient in people debating ideas respectfully, but also understanding other people's perspectives. And that's where collaboration comes in. I can see you want to ask a question. I can feel it.
It was all sort of tied together, I guess, a few things. The feedback being a two-way street, something that I massively believe in. And I guess when it comes to the accountability aspect of individual team members in relation to the vision, it's like it's the same as playing sport on a team. If everyone knows that they have to do this job really well, team to succeed, it makes it easier for you to succeed or feel accomplished yourself and make sure you hit those personal deadlines. So I guess, yeah, if you've pigeonholed a bunch of people and they've got, the blinders on and they can't see the outcomes of their work, that will lead to disheartenment, right? Like that's one of the things.
Absolutely. And look, full disclosure, I think one of the good things about leaders who create psychological safety, it's always a mouthful, is to be really authentic and say where you've screwed up. And, my career trajectory as a leader of 16 plus years has not been full of moments of, yeah, I did that well. When I look back, I remember a team member kept coming to me saying, we need to set a vision. We need a strategic plan. And I was relatively new in my career and I didn't fully understand and appreciate the importance of that. And in hindsight, I do, because what people were asking for was, what's the North Star? Where are we going? And that would have provided more clarity around, well, we know where we're going. So that gives us greater clarity on what each of us needs to do to get there. So yeah, certainly learn from my mistakes as well, and what I could do better in future. And that's why I feel well placed now to be able to help people to create that safety. Treating everyone fairly, managing workloads, calling things out early. Where I was going with the conflict thing before as well was I hear so many leaders go, I was going to have that conversation with somebody, But then I got in my head and I started thinking about the worst case scenario and how they responded last time. And then I can get into the mindset where I think, oh, I'll have that conversation tomorrow, or maybe it wasn't that bad. I will address that if it happens again.
Yeah.
We go into this analysis paralysis with ourselves, lack the confidence to address things in a timely fashion. And as you become more experienced as a leader and you see the value of that real-time feedback, and then just go have the conversation, obviously do it discreetly if required, and really focus on what people have done well and where they can improve. And in psychological safe workplaces, those conversations, people don't freak out when the manager says, hey, can I speak to you for a moment? You see it all the time. Hey, can I speak to you for a moment? And people think, have I lost my job? What have I done wrong? But I think if you make that real-time feedback something that's the norm, then those difficult conversations are easier to have.
Yeah, especially, I know I've seen it before. It's happened to me. Like, do not do it over an email. Whereas, like, hi, just putting in this one-on-one meeting for a bit of a chat, and it's in like 3 days. Like, that just had me absolutely sweating buckets for the next 3 days. If it's dynamic on the spot, so hey, let's go into this room, great pitch or great whatever. But next time, here's some things, and then if you'd like from me to support you to do that, then it's over in 5 minutes on the spot. You don't have any anxiety, like.
Absolutely. And I think one of the other things I love working with leaders on is, as a coach myself, is how to support them to become leaders who can coach their teams as well. So, hey, what do you think you did well with that?
Yeah.
When you reflect at the big picture, is there something you would like to have done differently? And get them to come up with the answers. And that empowers people. They feel valued. They feel like what they think is important. These things aren't difficult to do when you know how to do them. And that's where I love supporting leaders to understand how they can get maximum impact, create trust, create transparency, create autonomy with their teams. Because ultimately, good mental health in a workplace is reliant on psychological safety. Because if you're worrying about, your manager coming down hard on you, or speaking to you disrespectfully, or calling you out in front of other people, or diminishing what you've contributed and taking recognition for those things, you're not going to be feeling very safe and mentally well in the workplace.
The other good thing as well, I think, with feedback, looking back on all the amazing bosses I've had, is getting out, delivering something, and just they're coming and looking at it, or they've been in the meeting with you, and the first thing they say after is like, fuck, you smashed that.
Yeah.
But, whoa, cool, okay. And then automatically everything is really open, and it starts with the positive and then builds into constructive feedback. But I was already like,
absolutely.
They're like, yeah, we loved it. And then it's kind of like, and then, is there anything? And I just remember still to this day, like coming out of, whatever situation and just getting, big pat on the back from the boss with a big smile. Just they're the bosses I respected the most, really, when I look the ones I remember.
Absolutely. I was just thinking then about just they're often small but thoughtful actions that a leader takes that creates the safety. So I was just remembering a CEO that I had in the big health organization I was working for. We'd had a huge critical incident, and had to rally the team really quickly. He came down and delivered a handwritten note just to say, hey, thank you. Your efforts haven't gone unnoticed. And the impact that had, I'm sitting here talking about it now years later. So I don't think it necessarily has to be these grand gestures, but just shows, hey, I'm thinking and I appreciate you. The impact that can have on people's career trajectory cannot be underestimated. And that's why I'm really passionate about what I do, because I really want people to have that positive experience where they feel valued, they feel like their contribution matters. And guess what they're going to do? They're probably going to go the extra mile because they feel seen and they feel valued. So yeah, it's pretty cool.
Yeah, whether that was like a subliminal thing that was going on in my boss's head at the time, but as soon as I had like that boss on a project or that boss on a project, I would automatically work so much harder for like without even thinking about it. It's like, oh, he's
Absolutely.
me. Okay, sweet. Whereas if the other block blocks off early is I expect you still to have this done by this time. I'm like, what the fuck am I? Why am I bothering? Like,
Mm, mm. I mean, look, we're human beings, like we want to feel appreciated and seen, whatever role we have in an organization. And the deleterious effects, I don't know why I use that word, but it popped into my mind, was of a micromanager is just so much destruction. There's distrust, there's paranoia, there's stress, there's overwhelm because you never quite know who you're going to get. It's unpredictable. People become suspicious of each other and don't collaborate as much. People protect their patch a bit more. So I think it's important to emphasize the negative impacts of micromanagement in how that just does not create psychological safety.
yeah, I guess that's another interesting thing about micromanagement. Like in your
Mm.
experience, is that a inherited trait or a learned trait? Like if I've had a boss who is a micromanager, am I more likely to become a micromanager? And if so, like what should I be doing to get out of that path? Like,
Mm. Mm.
I don't even know if it's possible.
Yeah, well, that's a big question and probably a series of podcasts. But I think in terms of micromanagement, well, what is it? To me, it's about control and compliance, and it's often driven by fear. So I'm thinking back to an organization I worked in some time ago where my leader was a micromanager, and I think often it's not about the employees they're managing, but it's about their own anxiety and it's about their own fear. And that can be coming from their manager.
Yeah.
So I think it's can be a really complex set of dynamics that are at play. If the overall organizational culture is one of um, control and compliance, you often find multiple micromanagers at different levels. In the scenario where it's a really inexperienced new manager, for example, the driver of being a micromanager can come from good intention, which is they want to do a good job, they want people to get things right, but it backfires because people don't feel trusted, and all of those micromanagement, I guess, consequences can occur. Like I said before, the distrust and paranoia, and I don't mean paranoia as in a diagnosis of a paranoid. What am I trying to say? This is one of those parts where you'll probably cut it out of the podcast, or not.
It comes
But
back to,
could you?
I think, it's that, paranoia or the fear. Maybe it's your own fear of just, I understand what you're saying.
Yeah.
Because I guess it all comes back to the fact like maybe you don't realize you're a micromanager until someone who is really good at giving constructive feedback underneath you goes, hey, I'm new to the team, just want to quickly chat with you. And they almost do the feedback upwards where you might have been told that you're a micromanager before because no one else felt comfortable to talk to you about it. So I guess it comes to that safety again, which I guess in relation to psychosocial hazards, if you look at the really big ticket items like bullying, harassment, discrimination, sexual harassment in particular, and implications for directors of those things getting swept under the rug. If it's not surfaced and no one feels comfortable to talk about it, that's when you get the worst case situation happening, really, is someone not felt comfortable to talk about it. It might have been systemic and it's come to a point where I'm now in crisis state. And that's, I guess, really, from your point of view, like how should leaders really strategically think about preventing those situations from happening?
I think you've said a couple of things that are really worth calling out. So one is, I think psychological safety needs to be a top down and a bottom up approach. So it's everybody's responsibility to create psychological safety, but there is an extra impetus on leaders because leaders set the climate, they set the mindsets, they set the expectations, the accountability, they set the culture, and they role model or otherwise what's acceptable behaviors. So if, for example, a leader is And the other element of that is it's easy, it's relatively easy to be kind and clear and calm, the three C's, when things are going well.
Yeah.
And in answer to your question in regards to how do leaders set that up to prevent those horrible circumstances happening in the organization, it's being ahead of the curve. So it's stopping, it's taking stock, it's making sure that everyone's clear on what's required of them. It's making sure that everyone's clear on that their opinion is respected, and that those people, when they do express their opinions, can do so in a way that they feel heard, that their ideas are taken on and implemented as well. Because I think in a control compliance situation, often those managers will ask for people's opinions and thoughts and ideas, but eventually people start to see that as just an exercise of placating them, rather than, hey, my thoughts and my beliefs and what I have to offer is actually being implemented. And then eventually what happens is they become silent.
Yeah.
Or they become uh, negative, but in a way that's destructive. So yeah, I think to me it's about being ahead of the curve. So leaders having a high level of emotional intelligence. I can't believe it's taken me this long to say anything about emotional intelligence. um, is to be aware of their own emotions, being really aware of what they are, having a really high level of emotional literacy, then being able to manage those emotions. And like I was saying before, not just when things are going well, but when things, when the rubber's hitting the road. And being able to approach people with compassion, empathy, so that you get the best out of people. These things aren't actually, they're not, it's not rocket science, this stuff, but it is difficult, especially as leaders having so many different responsibilities. You've got your technical skills, you've got your project deadlines, you've got your pressure from management above, you've got unexpected pressures coming in, you've got staff who are either behaving inappropriately or, yeah, there's so many different elements. So it can seem really complex. And I think that's why it's really important, especially early on in the leadership role with teams, to define what's expected, to define what the communication pathways are, to define what the processes are, to define what is unacceptable in terms of behavior as well, and role model that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think it's quite interesting as well with what you were saying about getting feedback from people, like larger organizations I've been in, where you get your yearly pulse check-in survey, and no one, because I do this every year. I put the same things every year. It never happens, but that's I guess because they're doing it for 500 people in one survey. Whereas what I guess you're saying is you should almost do it in team-based surveys, where the team has the ability to make a change within the team, which flows on, is probably a better way of approaching it, I guess.
Yeah, and I think the time investment, like it can be so easy to go, right, we're going to do this bulk survey and we're going to get this high level areas where we can improve. And I'm not disregarding the value of that on some level, but I think the time investment early on that leaders could make to save them a whole lot of pain and time further down the track is to meet with individual team members, get to know who they are, not just inside the office, but outside of the office as well. And really listen to them with empathy, listen to them with compassion, with active listening. Don't be on your phone, don't be checking your emails while you're talking to people. Then at the team level, what is everyone's role in the team? Who's bringing what strength? Who's responsible for what? And setting the tone for when things do get difficult or when things are hard, that people are more likely to feel like they can approach the leader or rely on their teammates. Because it's when things go wrong that if you haven't done that foundational work with people and investment in time, that you're running dual processes. You're dealing with whatever crisis it is has come up, but you're also trying to work backward and think, okay, well, what do I need to do here? But if you've done that foundational work, it's a lot easier to respond in an effective way when things do get difficult. And let's face it, the business world is challenging,
Yeah. I think that's also
really challenging.
well, if you're a new leader and you've only had rosy sunshine like your
Mm,
whole career,
mm,
and then all of a sudden the wheels do fall off the bus, you
mhm,
might have someone in the team that can actually support you, like
mhm,
just being able to ask, like, I've never seen this happen before. Like,
mm,
have you? And like, yeah, we saw this happen this time, and this is what we did, and it was all fine. And maybe
mhm,
that, I guess, you know, if you're not trying to be a control and compliance based manager, and you have
mm,
to accept other people's, you know, thoughts in there, you could probably get through the crisis.
mhm. Absolutely. Yeah, with greater clarity, because everybody already knows what their roles are. They know what the rules of engagement are. So you're more likely to have the robust, open, honest discussions that need to be had in order to move forward.
Mm.
Without those ingredients there, when things go wrong, and they will, because we're humans and we work in complex, fast changing organizations, um, that you've got those key ingredients there. And I think there's some value as well, Joel, and we were talking about this before the podcast started about hopefully I don't get tongue tied and uh, garble my words. But then I thought, you know what? It's actually okay. It's okay. And it's important for leaders to show vulnerability and admit to their mistakes. And I can possibly almost hear people going, what? But I think one of the most powerful things a leader can do is to go, you know what? I got that wrong.
Mm.
I got that wrong. And this is the reason why I got that wrong. And this is what I've done about it. And I wanted to run it by you in case I've missed something, because that gives people permission and a really strong message that not to go about and make mistakes all the time, but you're human, you're probably going to make mistakes. And I'd rather you be able to come to me and say, hey, got this wrong, rather than bury the mistake and things become, worse than they need to be. I think there's some real power in leaders being vulnerable and admitting their fallibility. I
Yeah,
really do.
absolutely. I think it's one of the best ways to get respect out of the people underneath you is to admit
Mm-hmm.
screwed up. I guess coming back to emotional intelligence,
Mm-hmm.
we've had a chat about this previously. Something I'm
Mm-hmm.
not very familiar with. I hope I have some, but I guess yeah, to how it connects in with psychosocial hazards and psychologically safe workplaces. I guess how would you upskill in emotional intelligence if I'm an everyday punter? Like, what do I?
Mm-hmm. Mm. Again, big question, but good one. So emotional intelligence you might have heard of emotional quotient. So EQ. So you hear that in interchangeable terms. So EQ is the emotional quotient. So it's basically 4 quadrants. So we're looking at our um, self-awareness, how we manage ourselves, social awareness, and relationship management. So without self-awareness, we might go from meeting to meeting and somebody's looked at us the wrong way or said something in a condescending way. We've had an emotional response, we haven't been aware of it, we've bounced into our next meeting, and Jane in that meeting cops a mouthful about something because I've had an emotional reaction which I haven't been aware of. It's built up and then it's misplaced. So it's really it's about me being aware of and us being aware of what's happening for us. We are human. We're going to have emotional responses, but how do we manage that? I talk about the power of the pause. The pause is really important because we'll have an emotional reaction. If we don't stop and pause and understand what's going on for us, it's really easy to roll into the next situation or meeting and not show up how we want to show up. So how we manage that in the pause is really important. And it's not about sitting there in the pause going, oh, that person, and ruminating and having an even stronger emotional response. It's about what I call being above the line, which is how could I be doing things differently? How did I contribute to that situation? How am I feeling? How do I want to respond rather than react? So it's how I spend my time in that pause, which is equally important. I'm then more likely to go into another situation and manage myself in a way and show up how I want to. And I think how that relates to psychological safety is if people are unaware of their emotional responses and then how they're showing up as a result, that obviously then impacts on how we interact with other people.
Yeah.
So it's, to me, it's a direct correlation with psychological safety and reducing psychosocial hazards in the workplace, because if we're aware of ourselves, and let's face it, we've only got control over how we respond to our emotions or react to them, then if we're not aware of that, we're going to go into situations we're more likely to get into unhelpful, unresourceful conflicts with people, or speak to people in ways, and I don't mean just verbally, I mean non-verbally as well. Given only 7% of what we communicate to people is through our words, 93% is through our tone, the pace of our speech, and our facial expressions and body language. If we're not aware of that and we're walking into a situation and everything's falling out sideways because we haven't managed ourselves, of course that's going to impact on how we show up with other people. That's where you get people feeling quite unsafe because Billy might have just had an interaction with somebody else, has walked into a situation, is scowling at everybody, and people feel unsafe. So you can see those direct correlations.
And it's spread the badness, I guess, around as they go until it can kind of engulf the whole department or sort of project slide or whatever.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a quote I've got on my website, which is from a fellow in EQ, Richard Boyansis. Sorry, Richard, who talks about leaders being emotional contagions. So we have the power as leaders to spread positive energy or negative energy, and it all starts with us and how we're regulating ourselves and how aware we are. The best leaders I've seen are really emotionally intelligent. They are aware of their emotional vocabulary, what's happening for them, how to regulate that, and therefore how to show up and have positive impact in relationships. So you can see someone's not very aware and the horrible impacts that can have on other people.
Yeah, I was chatting to someone the other week who exactly what you just mentioned there around going from meeting to meeting and sort of having that downtime. And their big tip is they'll just say they need to go to the bathroom and no one can say, no, you can't be late to this meeting because you're going to piss yourself in the meeting or whatever. And they just sit in a cubicle, and if they do and they have headphones, they'll just put in like a quick meditation. They've got something lined up and it's just sitting there and just resetting before they go into the next one, which I thought I'd never heard of anyone doing that before, but it sounds like that's a pretty positive step.
Resets, yeah, I like that. The reset instead of the pause. Same thing. You're taking that moment just to ground and work out what's going on for you, and then go into your day with a different mindset. Because at the end of the day, if you've got a crappy mindset and you're interacting with people, you're not going to get the result you want. So yeah, there's a huge connection. So in terms of emotional intelligence, I do lots of things. So I work with leaders and team members as well, because I'm a life coach as well as leadership coach, is to get people clear on what are the thoughts they're having that are unhelpful. Is it getting them to where they want to go? Exploring their emotional literacy. So understanding the range of emotions they have and why perhaps they get triggered by different interactions. We then map out some really cool tools, strategies, techniques to get people more emotionally aware and are able to respond rather than react. In terms of formal emotional intelligence, I'm a certified behavioral profiler. That sounds like very CSI. So I can look at behavioral profiles with people with a really simple assessment and it's a validated assessment tool, both in behavioral analysis, but also emotional intelligence. So that gives some really rich information for us to have coaching or training in, which is really cool, because often you ask someone, do you think you're emotionally intelligent? And they'll be, oh, yeah, I'm pretty emotionally intelligent. And then you scratch the surface a bit, and it's no fault of theirs. We've all got reasons why we're not emotionally intelligent in some areas, and we've all got areas to grow. It's a really cool platform to start from, to go, okay, well, you're saying you're strong in this area, but the assessment you completed says you could probably develop in this area. What do you think about that? And yeah, it's cool. So there's so many different strategies. It really depends on the individual, the team, or the organization as to what it is they need. We just have a really relaxed conversation about what those needs are, and work out from there the best course of action to get the results they want. So yeah.
That's super, I guess, super interesting. So, say, hypothetically, I'm an organization. I've just got this new psychosocial hazard legislation whacked on me by the government. I've done, some research and that kind of thing. I guess, what would you propose as a strategy? Is it almost like have a discussion with, a life coach like yourself, identify maybe your weaknesses as the leader at the top first, and then sort of go, okay, I'm weak in this area, we should probably do training here or here, and then you can kind of filter down the ladder? Like, what would it all tie together essentially?
Yeah, every organization is going to be different. So I am a leader in leadership and life coach, and the reason being, leaders are people, yeah. And often you'll get online and you'll see a whole lot of leadership information, and even I get bamboozled by it sometimes when I look it up, because there's so many different areas that you can respond to leadership. So I do leadership and life coaching because leaders are human beings. That's the first thing. And they often bring with them their past, their previous experiences, their childhoods, everything that makes them up as a human being and what impacts on their leadership. So often, if an individual leader comes to me, we'll talk about what are the challenges you're having?
Mm.
What do you think you need? Where do you want to be? Then I'll put a bit of a plan together in terms of a proposed course of action that we could take to get them the results that they want. In another scenario, an organization might come to me and go, look, we're just having a whole lot of issue with retention, which I'm hearing is a huge issue across the board at the moment, because people just won't tolerate crappy workplaces anymore.
Yeah.
And there's so many different options out there. So organizations might come to me and go, look, we're having these issues with 3 of our leaders, the other 5 are awesome. Can you focus on meeting with them? And in that case, I could do individual and or group coaching. The organization might say, look, we want some training followed by some coaching. So the training would, for example, consist of emotional intelligence. I'd get the leaders, if the organization is up for this, to do an emotional intelligence assessment. We would then look at those results together, unpack what that means, then look at what it means to be an emotionally intelligent team. And that could be a team at any level. That could be a leadership team, a team in general, and how they want to work together moving forward for better results. So there's so many different scenarios that can happen. It's really about understanding, me not coming in as an expert, but coming in really curious about, okay, what are the challenges you're having? What do you think might be contributing to those challenges? These are some of the things I can offer, and this is what I'm suggesting could be the best course of action. And then we go from there and start doing the work. So I love it. I just love seeing people have those aha moments where they can, and excitement again, an excitement about their leadership and the potential of the impact that they can have on their team. So I work with leaders specifically, but I also work with basically anyone that wants to improve their life, improve their career, improve their leadership. So yeah, it's a mixed bag really. Yeah.
Interesting. It's a new challenge every time, never gets stale, I guess, which is pretty cool.
And look, most people, I generally find and I've had to overcome this myself as well, the self-doubt, that little voice of self-doubt, or sometimes loud voice of self-doubt, that gets in the way. You hear people talk about imposter syndrome. Do I belong here? Someone's going to find out I don't actually know what I'm doing. That's normal. That's actually quite normal, but it's what you do with it that makes a difference. And that's where I feel like I can come in and add lots of value for people to understand what they do well, where they want to improve, and develop a plan to get there. Yeah.
I think, yeah, imposter syndrome is another big challenge that obviously relates up and wraps up in, I guess, across the past sort of 6 months, you've seen a lot of stuff is probably putting you on the spot a little bit, but what would be sort of like the big three? It's like, I'm an organization, I've never embarked on anything like this before. I don't, I've never looked at psychosocial hazards. I don't have any health initiatives. Like, what would be the three critical areas to focus on, I guess, for them?
So I think the key thing to do with psychosocial hazards, and I know you did some work with this, Joel, is to break them down into sections, because otherwise in the legislation it can be quite overwhelming, and again be something you put in the drawer and go, we'll deal with that later. But I think it's about breaking it down into bite-sized pieces. Okay, so what are the main domains that we need to be looking at as organizations in terms of psychosocial hazards? Again, I think that the foundational item in that is psychological safety, because then when people do see psychosocial hazards in the workplace, low job control, bullying and harassment, all the different elements that make up psychosocial risk, if there's psychological safety, they're more likely to speak up and report those psychosocial hazards. So I think it's about breaking it down into bite-sized pieces and working with leaders and organizations to understand what are the key elements they need to be looking at in regards to psychosocial hazards. What is the climate they need to create in order for people to feel like they can speak up?
Yeah.
What are the processes that are in place? What are the systems that they're using to report the psychosocial hazards? But I think it's psychosocial safety and psychological safety is about cultural safety. It's about laying the foundation for people to, first of all, understand what those things are. What is a psychosocial hazard? And if I identify it, what do I do about it? But again, more people are more likely to speak up about what they're seeing and contribute to a safer environment if there's a culture, an open culture, an honest culture, a transparent culture. So, and emotional safety underpins all of that.
Yeah, and I guess there's a few quick wins where you can look at it. You can look at your retention rates, sick days, like obviously going to be sort of red flags of like, I might have a problem with. So I guess that's an easy way for organizations to be like, if you're noticing that your average retention period is and not much longer, and people are like, is that sort of one of a few different red flags that you would look out for?
Yeah, thank you for bringing me back to the original question you asked, Joe. I appreciate you being open and transparent with me. So I think, look, transparency, I'll go back. Retention, I've heard it in organizations, people say, well, that's just the nature of this work, or we're just offering contracts, and you can explain it away as being feasible, that's a possibility, but probably untrue. If you've had 16 to 20 people in a small organization resign in a short period of time, I think that organizations need to really look at why is that. And do people even feel safe to honestly say the reason why they've left in their exit interview? That's if they're offered an exit interview. So exit interviews, I think, are important, but if you've got an open organization where people are having conversations, you should know these issues are happening long before somebody resigns and completes an exit interview. So retention, I think being courageous enough to actually look inward and go, what do we need to do here to improve so that we retain people is one thing. I think there's so many different markers: retention, work cover claims. How many work cover claims are being submitted, how many Safe Work New South Wales notifications are being made. I mean, there obviously things are pretty bad if those things are happening. Are there staff surveys that can be conducted, not just in the yearly People Matter survey or pulse check surveys, but what sort of review systems are in place on a regular basis? Performance reviews. Are we, completing performance reviews and then putting them in the drawer until the six month or the annual review? Or are we actually using that document as a live document where we're having iterative discussions on a regular basis about how people are performing, what can be improved? I think it's that engagement, real genuine engagement on regular, frequent basis, where you can pick up some of these issues before they get to the point of the things we talked about before. Challenging the status quo. That's one thing I haven't mentioned. I think if there's an organization, the whole high control and compliance organizations, where there's the status quo, and you challenge it and you become an outsider as a result of challenging that, I think the time has come and the legislation is there to support and drive these changes that organizations need to make. And the organizations that don't make these changes will be left behind.
Yeah, because
they'll be left behind.
Yeah.
So I don't want to sound dramatic, but I think that's the nature of what we're looking at here. There's a drive for safety because we see the importance of safety in productivity, efficiency, mental health, well-being, all of those elements that are attached to genuinely psychologically safe and psychosocially safe workplaces. Blah, blah, blah.
All the time. I think that's super interesting, and I thank you so much for coming on and talking about this. I guess before we finish up, if people want to get in touch with you, learn a bit more about what you do, where can they find more information?
Yeah, so there's my website, which is othersideedgecoaching.com.au. You can also email me at ruben@othersideedgecoaching.com.au.
Contact information in the notes for this as well.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, thank you so much for coming on. It's going to keep evolving rapidly in the next 6 to 12 months, and especially once the first, I guess, court case comes out off the back of legislation and it's actually applied. I think the organisations that take positive steps now will really be shielded, I guess, from any potential big outcomes that could come.
And look, it's unfortunate that legislation has to be in place to drive what I think is just be kind. Like, be kind, be clear, be considerate, be compassionate. And if you've got the 4 C's, I'm really favouring the C's today, aren't I? I think it's just, I don't know. I think just being courteous and kind. And you get the best out of people that way, and we can just get on with our jobs and enjoy ourselves.
Yeah. I think that's always it when you think about what percentage of your life you spend at work. It's like you're in an organization that really values you and you value it's going to make just everything so much easier on all fronts.
I think it's 1/3 of our life that we spend at work, don't we?
Gosh.
And 50% of us will experience mental ill health at one time or another. So, these are all, we're there a lot. We're human beings, we're impacted, and just being kind to each other is actually quite a simple thing to do.
Yeah. I think you're 100% right. I really resonated with what you mentioned earlier about just like breaking down things into simple blocks and just I'm like not getting overwhelmed by the new legislation and I've got to do 50 different things now. It's like probably starts with just a few key things, follow simple and be kind, and you should be okay.
Yeah. I have no idea what I said, so hopefully it made sense.
Because I was able to replay it, so
yeah,
said it correctly. Awesome. But yeah, thank you everyone for listening in, watching. If you have any questions or any feedback, as always, just feel free to send me through some notes about feedback or anything you might want to touch on moving forward. But otherwise, thank you very much, Ruben, and have a great week.
Thanks for having me, Joel. Really appreciate it. And yeah, look forward to hearing from individuals and organisations who might need some support. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.